Welcome back to The Lead. So former President Jacob Zuma's sentencing has been historic. He is the first president in a democratic South Africa to serve time. So as journalists, we have been trying to make sense of these unprecedented time. Our task being to report accurately and keep you as our viewers informed. I want us to unpack the role of the media, right? What role has the media played in this massive story? But I want us to look at the political developments around the sentencing and the imprisonment of the former president. Let me invite my two guests, News 24 Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson and Verashni Pillay. She is the editor and founder of explain.co.za. Adriaan and Verashni, thank you so much to both of you for making time. Let me start with you, Verashni. Zuma has been, I suppose, desperate over a lot of years to avoid jail. He is in jail now, albeit not on corruption charges, but he's tried to avoid his day in court. What do you make of this moment, right? How the law has caught up with him now?
Well, Clement, firstly, thank you for having me on the show. And to answer your question, it's an absolutely momentous moment. It might seem theatrical to everyone who was watching and waiting till midnight last night for that arrest. But what has happened here is we have seen the rule of law being upheld at the highest level. This is the first time the system has been tested to see a former president actually go to jail. And we can see that he played a game of chicken with our state forces up until the last minute. And they quietly amassed the police vehicles, and they made it clear what their intention was. And he gave in and handed himself in for arrest. And it shows that he could not outrun the long arm of the law after all, even though he made a lot of noise to the contrary in the run-up to that moment.
Adriaan, it looks like he was still determined to implement what others have called the Stalingrad approach, right? He didn't have options anymore. Ordinarily, he would have tried another highest court if the Constitutional Court wasn't the apex court. But this time around, he didn't have a lot of options to take that Stalingrad approach.
Indeed, Clement. I mean, this is classic Jacob Zuma, to appeal and appeal and appeal until he can no longer find any court to hear the appeal. And I think after about, I would say, almost 20 years of this strategy, his luck has run out. He couldn't find a court that would entertain a late-night letter from his lawyers to the Constitutional Court to finally ask them to postpone his arrest until Monday's rescission judgment has been heard. I actually thought about this a lot this morning, about all the different legal advisors he got through the years. He obviously had Advocate Jack Kemp by his side for many years, who really piloted and perfected the Stalingrad strategy. Of late, he swapped lawyers between Musi Sekakane and then of late Dali Mpofu. But yes, his luck ran out last night, and there was nowhere to hide. He was in a corner and ultimately did the right thing to hand himself over to the police.
Verashni, do you think we're going to see a fight back here? People perhaps who support the former president planning a fight back. Edward Zuma tweeted that this is not over, Ramaphosa. We are going to fight until the end. And there are some people who may share these sentiments within the ANC. And obviously you can't really look at what happened with the former president and separate it from Carl Niehaus, who was temporarily suspended by the ANC yesterday. Do you think there are people somewhere out there in the ANC planning a fight back?
Well, if they are very much weakened. We have seen that the so-called the state capture faction or the radical economic transformation faction, the ANC, helmed by people like Zuma, Niehaus, Magashile, really being put on the back foot more and more by a gradually strengthened Ramaphosa. Now, I know a lot of us got very tired of seeing Ramaphosa take a long time to deal with certain elements in the ANC who were disrupting things, who were accused of corruption. And it turns out that that long game that he's often accused of has paid off. He stuck to processes, he stuck to the rule of law, and he managed to get the bulk of the NEC on his side. I mean, this is the NEC, the highest decision-making body of the ANC that actually came out. It wasn't Ramaphosa who came out and said, you know what, if you're going to go outside the Nkandla and make statements that bring the ANC into disrepute, you're temporarily suspended. You don't even get a chance to defend yourself. We are invoking a section of our constitution that says we're going to be able to do this because of extraordinary circumstances. And so this past week, you saw a minor character like Carl Niehaus, who doesn't even have a portfolio anymore because they've disbanded the MKNVA, being suspended. So this coalition of the wounded around Zuma is gradually losing steam. And people like Edward Zuma unfortunately made quite a spectacle of themselves last night, brandishing a stick against the full might of our state descending upon Nkandla to uphold our apex court ruling.
Yeah. I mean, the visuals last night were quite intriguing. Adriaan, do you think this is the final nail on the coffin for the so-called unity project? Because when we were all at Nasrec and the ANC had just elected this mixed bag of leaders, you know, the word that was probably most used there was unity. This is a united ANC, and you're uniting different factions. Is this it, really? And the ANC can't ever claim again that it's trying to bring in those so-called radical economic transformation faction and those that are pro-Cyril Ramaphosa.
Clement, you would very well know, as I do, that politics, one day is a long time, so there's never a moment, I think, where we can say something is gone forever. But the ANC has clearly changed their narrative and their tune over the past few months. You're quite right. The unity, above all, is no longer the narrative, the theme. Over the past few days and weeks, it's been democracy, constitutionality, and the rule of law. The ANC will always support the rule of law and constitutionality. And I think Verashni is right. I think that Ramaphosa has played the long game quite effectively here and has dealt or is dealing with his political foes. One must just be careful of that argument because that could imply that he has control over the courts, which of course he doesn't do. Jacob Zuma's imprisonment was completely an independent decision by the Constitutional Court full bench or majority. I think the unity project is buried. The only remnant is probably Deputy President David Mabuza, who was that obviously key person to get the ANC to elect Ramaphosa as president. But I think going forward, the president is clearly in charge. He has neutralized his opponents to a large extent. And I won't be surprised if he's even unopposed at next year's ANC conference.
Yeah. I want us to talk about the role of the media in a short while and how we have covered this significant story. But Verashni, I want to get your thoughts on the role the president played. I saw the DA saying they had expected the president to come out and be clear and speak to South Africans and say, we respect the rule of law. He was really staying clear around the story. He was allowing the ANC to lead the pack in terms of communicating what the collective decision and approach of the ANC is. What do you make of his role throughout this saga? But what do you also make of the approach that the ANC has taken? They don't want to, it seems, abandon the former president, right? They have said, well, we respect the rule of law, but they're saying this is a difficult moment for the party.
Absolutely. So to answer the first part of your question, my colleague Adriaan is absolutely correct. We shouldn't conflate the two processes there, and apologies if I did that. Within the ANC, there were the internal processes against people like Niehaus and Magashule that saw them being put on the back foot. When it comes to the court process against Zuma, what we saw the ANC quite correctly doing is stepping right back and saying we absolutely respect the Constitution. And I thought that part of their statement was quite interesting because you see a lot of accusations from a majority of South Africans or some South Africans saying that, the Constitution was a negotiated settlement, that we have this Constitution because we sold out to white majority capital or so on. And the ANC made it very clear that, no, we chose to be a constitutional democracy. This was not something we compromised on. We chose to have a democracy and we're going to stand by it. I thought that was very important to note. Now, to come back to what Adriaan was also saying, what the ANC did was quite careful. They stepped back. They stepped back and allowed an independent judicial process to run, and that was very key. Now, to answer your question about how Ramaphosa fits into all of this, I thought Stephen Puch's analysis in the Daily Maverick was very apt. He said what's great is that he allowed the NEC to make that announcement. So that dissolves him of being seen as a dictator, an autocrat coming in and swooping down on his enemies, his predecessor Zuma. He can now just say, I just repeat what the NEC said. The NEC statement says we support the rule of law. I support the rule of law. So it becomes less about individuals and factions and more about just processes. Now, for the second part of your question, it is clear. Oh, sorry, I've now forgotten what the second part of your question is.
I think you just answered that now, because you answered the one about the president and the approach that the ANC has taken. Before we get to the role of the media, Adriaan, do you think we overestimated the role, and in fact the influence of the former president? I mean, there was talk of possible civil unrest, and we saw, yes, his supporters on Sunday when they were outside his home. There was potential danger had the police acted. But do you think we overestimate the influence of the former president?
I think yes and no, Clement. I think, he's clearly been politically weakened, and he has not had the same kind of constituency after Nasrec, I would argue, probably even after the Gupta leaks, because that was really when all South Africans could see who Jacob Zuma was, that he was in effect the president for the Gupta family, his own family, and other charlatans who was part of the Zuma-Gupta bandwagon. I do, however, also want to say that I think, unfortunately, a country of the type of violence we have, it doesn't take a lot of people to cause massive violence, and one death is one death too many. So I also do think there's merit in the approach of the police in KZN on the weekend. I've listened to all sides, and I do think, it is not an unreasonable approach that they took. And it was interesting to see that last night they were really only a handful, a small group of supporters outside the gates of Nkandla, with a real possibility that the arrest was going to be affected last night, which also tells you something, that maybe those final Zuma supporters who were left realized that, the might of the law had finally turned against them.
Yeah. Verashni, how do you think we have fared as the media? How did we do in covering this story? I know you've got what I thought were interesting thoughts about how we had given sometimes as the media airtime to people when it was unnecessarily. How do you think we've fared?
Well, Clement, firstly, I think South Africa has, all things considered, a really robust journalism landscape. People like yourselves, people like Adriaan's teams are operating under extreme, duress, cut newsrooms, lack of resources, lots of stories to cover. So I think that journalists on the ground are working incredibly hard and doing a good job. However, I think sometimes the structure of the 24-hour news channel certainly creates a vacuum or a need for constant talking heads. And unfortunately, what that means sometimes is that we give certain fringe characters too much airtime. And I think what we've seen is people like Carl Niehaus specifically and other characters like him have been given a lot of opportunity to espouse what ends up being misinformation or paranoid conspiracy theories on major national platforms. And as much as talented broadcasters like yourself often taken to task, those lies get out onto a public network. And this is a discussion happening across the world as populism and right-wing misinformation comes to the fore and creates unstable democracies about how much airtime should we be giving people in the interest of let's hear both sides of the story, if that's going to really destabilize democracies and put out misinformation unchallenged. So that was my one concern with a lot of the airtime being given to characters who didn't have the facts at heart or were not espousing facts when it came to Zuma's case.
Yeah. And your thoughts, Adriaan, on how the media has covered this story?
Look, I do think the media, and I mean, it's easy to be accused of self-congratulatory, but I mean, I think the media has been exceptional over the past 20 years in covering the Jacob Zuma story, from that first expose by Sam Saul in the Mail and Guardian, linking Jacob Zuma to the arms deal corruption, to the Gupta leaks, cache of emails brought to South Africa by the Daily Maverick, Amabungane and News 24. I mean, that really blew open what led ultimately to the establishment of the Zondo Commission and the subsequent imprisonment of Jacob Zuma. So I think the role of the media during the state capture years has been immense. I do think journalists should be congratulated for their constant reporting, for going out there, telling the story and challenging the lies. On the topic of spokespeople who lie, I mean, that's not a new phenomenon, of course, or uniquely to South Africans. I think our role, Clement, will increasingly be to call out those lies, to challenge people and to fact check. What we did at News 24, for example, during former President Zuma's media conference at Nkandla a few evenings ago, was to do fact-checking in real time. And obviously the digital format allows you to do that, which I think is a great bonus, because we can't censor those voices. We can't censor the spokesperson of the former president, but we can fact-check him and we can call his lies out. And I think that's something that our newsroom specifically have learned from the Trump era in America, is very creative ways that you can use digital media to fact-check and to challenge and put the facts out there.
All right. News 24 Editor-in-Chief Adriaan Basson and, of course, Verashni Pillay, who is the founder and editor of explain.co.za. Thank you so much to both of you.